feeling of being all alone. I know that feeling. It really is almost unbearable, isn't it? Gaara.
There are a lot of sad backstories in anime, but Gaara's always hit a little differently for me. He never had a normal childhood. From the moment he was born, people looked at him and saw a problem. And when that's the first thing that the world tells you about yourself, eventually you start believing it. That's why I never thought that the saddest thing about Gaara was Shukaku. It's easy to point at a giant sand monster sealed inside of him and say that's what ruined his life. But honestly, the thing that ruined Gaara the most was loneliness. And I think that's what makes his story one of the most powerful character arcs in Naruto. Because at its core, Gaara's story is about somebody who spends their entire life searching for proof that they matter. When Gaara was born, his future was already decided for him. He was turned into a Jinchuriki, and right away things went wrong. His mother died during childbirth. The village feared him and other kids stayed away from him. Imagine growing up and realizing that every room gets quieter when you walk into it. Nobody wants to play with you, nobody wants to get close to you. People aren't looking at you with curiosity, they're looking at you with fear. That's the environment that Gaara grew up in. And here's the thing about kids, they're constantly learning who they are from the people around them. If you're encouraged, you start believing you're capable. If you're loved, you start believing you're worthy of love. But what happens when every message you're receiving tells you that you're unwanted? Eventually, those messages become your identity. For Gaara, that process started incredibly early, and it only got worse as time went on.
No, wait! Don't run away! Please. I don't want to be alone anymore.
One of the most heartbreaking parts of Gaara's story is that he actually wanted connection. A lot of people remember the version of Gaara that showed up during the Chunin exams, the one smiling while crushing people's bones, the one who seemed completely detached from human life, the one who terrified almost everyone around him. But that wasn't the kid that he started as. Young Gaara wasn't born wanting to hurt people. He wanted exactly what most children want, someone to make him feel like he belonged. And for a while, it looked like he had that person, Yashimaru, the person Gaara trusted most, which is why what happened next completely shattered him.
Was ordered to kill you, Gaara, by your own father.
My father?
My sister died bringing you into this world.
If you've watched Naruto, you already know the scene that I'm talking about. Gaara discovers that the one person he trusted most was sent to kill him. Then he learned something even worse. The person he thought cared about him supposedly hated him. Think about how devastating that gotta be. Not just betrayal, but confirmation. At least from Gaara's perspective. Everything he feared about himself suddenly felt true. Maybe he really was unlovable. Maybe everyone really did hate him. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with him. That's the moment where Gaara's worldview completely collapses. Because after that, he stops searching for love. Instead, he builds an entirely different identity, one centered around fear.
Kankuro, back off. You're an embarrassment to our village.
Hey, Gaara.
And honestly, fear made sense. If people were gonna avoid him anyways, he could at least make it happen on his terms. If people were gonna see a monster, he could become one. If nobody was ever gonna love him, then maybe being feared was enough. At least fear got a reaction. At least fear made people acknowledge he existed. When you look at Gaara through that lens, a lot of his behavior starts making more sense. He spent years trying to solve emotional pain through power, which is something people do in real life like all the time. Not with giant sand attacks obviously, but with success, status, money, attention. Sometimes people convince themselves that if they become impressive enough, they'll finally fill whatever hole they're carrying around. Gaara did something similar. The stronger he became, the more untouchable he became, the more feared he became. But none of it actually fixed the problem, because loneliness doesn't just disappear because you become powerful.
Sandberry!
That's why I think Gaara is one of the best examples of a character who has everything except the thing he actually needs. Strength, he has plenty of it. Talent, absolutely. Power, more than most people in the whole series. But underneath all of it is still the same lonely kid. And then Naruto shows up, which is where things get really interesting because Naruto and Gaara are incredibly similar. They're both Jinchuriki, they're both isolated, they're both victims of circumstances they never chose. The difference is they responded differently. Gaara looked at his suffering and decided the world was his enemy. Naruto looked at his suffering and kept reaching towards people anyway. Not perfectly or immediately, but eventually. And when Gaara sees Naruto fighting for his friends, risking everything for people he cares about, it completely breaks his understanding of the world. For the first time, he sees someone who experienced similar pain without becoming consumed by it. That's what changes him. Not talk no jutsu, at least not in the way that people joke about it online. What changes Gaara is the realization that another path exists.
But why? Why would you do this for anyone but yourself?
Because they saved me from myself. They rescued me from my loneliness. They were the first to accept me for who I am.
And I think that's what makes his redemption work. A lot of redemption arcs feel rushed. A character changes sides and suddenly everything's forgiven. But nah, Gaara's arc feels different because the foundation was always there. The lonely child never disappeared. They were just buried underneath years of pain and anger. Naruto had helped Gaara rediscover the person he'd been suppressing all along. One of my favorite moments in the entire series is seeing Gaara become Kazekage. Think about where he started. People feared him, avoided him, whispered about him. Now those same people trust him to lead. That's a huge transformation. And it's bigger than becoming stronger. It's bigger than winning fights. For the first time in his life, Gaara isn't protecting himself from the village. He's protecting the village. The thing he'd wanted all along finally happened. He found a place where he belonged.
I want to honor the two of them personally as a friend. I think that will please Naruto more. No chance.
I think Gaara still resonates with so many people years later. Most of us aren't carrying around a tailed beast or becoming world-class ninjas, but a lot of people know what loneliness feels like. And a lot of people know what it feels like to be misunderstood. What it's like to wonder if something is wrong with them because they can't seem to connect with others. Gaara taps into those feelings in a way that feels very human. His story isn't really about sand powers. It's not even about Shukaku. It's about someone who spent years believing they were impossible to love and slowly learning that they were wrong. When people talk about Gaara, they usually remember the fights, the Chunin exams, the sand coffins, the transformations, all the iconic moments. And don't get me wrong, those moments are great, but the reason people still care about Gaara isn't because he was powerful. It's because underneath all that power was a lonely kid trying to figure out where he belonged. And by the end of his story, he finally found that place. Not through becoming stronger than everybody else, but through connection. That's why I've always thought that the saddest thing about Gaara was never Shukaku. It was the loneliness, because the monster inside him wasn't what hurt him most. The belief that nobody could ever love him did. And that's the part of Gaara's story that still sticks with me all these years later. Yeah, Gaara is definitely one of my Shaylas for sure. But I hope you guys enjoyed that breakdown. If you want any other character broken down like this, let me know in the comments. This is Anime Under the Surface, and I'll see you guys next week.